other, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The information war begins over who was behind the bombing of the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza. The world's press jumped to the conclusion that it was the Israelis, but after the IDF has denied any involvement, and upon closer inspection of the evidence, it seems as if it were a faulty Palestinian rocket. We will be assessing the evidence in detail. And as scenes continue to unfold in Israel, demonstrators stormed the Israeli consulate in Jordan, while Western embassies were also targeted. In Turkey, Tunisia and Lebanon, with rioting also breaking out in the West Bank. It's been suggested by a Tory MP that the UK's support for Israel could constitute complicity in war crimes, but we'll be refuting his claim. In domestic news, it seems that the solution to broken Britain could lie in the private sector. A firm that has been dubbed Britain's first private police is set to take a suspected burglar to court after £500 of sirloin steak and 20 bottles of Prosecco were taken from a Marks and Spencer's. And while we don't advocate acts of civil disobedience here on State of the Nation, and we also don't tend to praise the French too often, an heroic French nun has seemingly taken matters into her own hands in tackling an eco-protester who was trying to stop the building of a new chapel. All of this comes on top of a lunatic suggestion from the National Infrastructure Commission that we ought to abolish our entire domestic gas grid. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by a pugnacious panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, you know him well, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the author and academic Lisa Mackenzie. I'm told they're not related. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@GBNews. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that the US President Joe Biden has been speaking in Israel today. He's announced an agreement to allow humanitarian aid to move from Egypt in the south into Gaza. He also confirmed $100 million worth of new US funding for that aid for Gaza and for the West Bank. President Biden's visit to Israel was meant to prevent an escalation of the conflict in the region, but after last night's bombing of the hospital in Gaza, planned meetings with regional leaders have had to be cancelled. Later on, in a speech, he stressed the importance of living by the rule of law.
You are a Jewish state, but you're also a democracy. And like the United States, you don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law. When conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. Israeli, Palestinian, Arab, Jew, Muslim, Christian, everyone. You can't give up what makes you who you are. If you give that up, then the terrorists win, and we can never let them win.
Well, the US president has also supported the Israeli Defense Forces' claims that the explosion at the hospital in Gaza last night was caused by a failed rocket attack on Israel by another terror group operating within Gaza called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Officials in Gaza, however, are still blaming the Israelis for the explosion, which they say killed nearly 500 people. Rishi Sunak, speaking in Clacton-on-Sea earlier today, described the hospital explosion as shocking, but appealed for calm heads as intelligence analysts establish exactly what happened. Now, hundreds of pro-Palestine protesters have gathered outside Downing Street tonight. Calling for justice, people are holding placards calling for an end to the massacre of civilians. The crowd also lit candles for the victims of last night's explosion at the hospital in Gaza. Consumer news: and milk, cheese and egg prices fell last month, easing pressure at the supermarket tills, but fuel prices rose sharply. It comes as the UK's overall inflation remained at 6.7%, despite expectations it'd fall again. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. Oil prices are higher because of the war in Ukraine, and now events in Israel and Palestine have sparked further increases. And lastly, a red weather warning for rain has been issued by the Met Office for parts of Scotland. It means very dangerous weather's expected, with extensive flooding likely to pose a risk to life. The weather warning runs from 6 p.m. tomorrow until noon on Friday. Storm Barbette has already hit the Republic of Ireland, with flooding we've seen in Cork and along the Devon coast. It's on its way in. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
I'd like to begin this monologue with an apology. Last night, while we were discussing US President Joe Biden's visit to Israel, one of the headlines that appears as I'm talking said, Iranian regime calls Israeli strike on Gaza hospital a war crime. Like many of the world's media, we were too hasty in assuming that the tragic strike on the Al-Ahli hospital was conducted potentially by the Israelis. But it appears that this is wrong. The Israelis have responded saying it wasn't them. Here was US President Joe Biden with Israeli Prime Minister commenting on the matter earlier today.
Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs, as you know. I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said roughly 450 Hamas rockets intended to strike Israel have fallen short and landed in Gaza. Here's a clip posted by the Israeli government from Israeli News Channel 12, which appears to prove the point.
You can see the rockets. This is the left red stamp fired over the hospital, which is the right, and you can see the blast. So that is proof of the fact that it came from the Gaza Strip.
This clip appears to show rockets fired from Gaza over the area of the Al-Ahli hospital moments before it exploded. GB News has not been able to verify the footage independently. The IDF spokesman also read out a translated transcript of an intercepted call between Hamas terrorists in which they discussed the failed rocket which fell short. The transcript implied the rocket was fired by another Palestinian terror group, Islamic Jihad. Listen to this clip, which again we've been unable to verify independently.
I'm telling you, this is the first time we've seen a missile like this falling, and so that's why we are saying it belongs to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What? They are saying it belongs to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's from us. It looks like it.
In my view, all the evidence indicates that the Israelis are telling the truth. Earlier in the day, this is what I wanted to believe. I thought and hoped that Israel, who is responding to such a wicked terrorist attack, was likely to be telling the truth, and I wanted that to be true. But as the day had gone on, the evidence for the Israeli position has become stronger and stronger. Paul Beaver, a British defence analyst, told The Times that extensive satellite and mobile phone images showed the rocket responsible for the explosion was ground-launched, not air-launched, and experts can spot differences which allow them to see which it was. He went on to say, the Israeli Air Force has been using precision-guided bombs, not dumb, unguided bombs on Gaza. And these weapons don't generate a plume. And anyway, the rocket was going the wrong way. The laws of physics are on the Israelis' side. And Hamish de Breton-Gordon, a British weapons expert, said the Israeli denials were plausible, given the lack of a deep crater at the site of the explosion. And Al Jazeera, which is not particularly friendly towards the Israelis, actually had a live stream which indicated that this rocket came from Gaza. Equally important, a democratic state cannot afford to be caught out telling lies, and historically, Israel has been willing to admit mistakes when it has made them. Of course, it's important to carry out a proper investigation, and whilst that's happening, this has unfortunately allowed Hamas a short-term propaganda coup. But as the facts are being established, and they do seem to be showing that Israel is clearly telling the truth, it will be shown that it's Hamas who has no concern for the people that it seeks to represent. Of course, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts via mailmog@gbnews.com. Joining me now is former senior military intelligence officer and chemical weapons expert Philip Ingram. Philip, thank you very much for joining me. What is your understanding of the science behind where the attack would have come from?
Well, there's a number of different bits of science that are behind it that Israeli intelligence have used in trying to provide evidence to us. And then President Biden will have had that science and a little bit more into him. So, as Hamish de Breton-Gordon mentioned, there was the site of where the missile would have landed and the lack of a crater that's there. That and the crater shape and the explosion from that and the damage that there was to the surrounding cars and the surrounding buildings give an idea as the sort of explosion and the sort of warhead that was there. And we saw that cars were burned, they weren't blasted out of the place. We look at the sort of munitions that the Israelis use, and they're 500-pound plus bombs. They would have turned these cars over. They would have demolished walls inside the buildings, not put pockmarks from shrapnel and bits and pieces in there. We've seen the video evidence that you brought in, but that video evidence, we can see the explosion happening. Now, a lot of intelligence assets will have sensors focused in the area because of everything that's going on. And a lot of those sensors are looking for intelligence that falls into the bracket of what's called measurement and signature intelligence. And one of the things to look at is the thermal signature. Now, we know astronomers, whenever they look out into space, can tell how stars are made up, what chemicals are made up from, whether they are burning lots of hydrogen, whether they've got lots of carbon in them. That same science is used in analysing the flames that come out from an explosion. And you can tell whether it's a rocket fuel, whether it's a high explosive. You can almost identify exactly what weapon system that's come from. And that's just the start of the science analysis of what they've been doing.
And if it's a rocket fuel, then that means that it has come from Hamas, because that's not the way Israel has been delivering its munitions. Are you aware, do you think that the security services already know pretty conclusively, but it's a question of releasing the information in a way that doesn't reveal some of their techniques?
Partially. The Israeli briefing that there was earlier today gave away a lot of detail, including radar imagery. And this is the other important thing. You don't rely on a single source piece of information. You bring lots of different bits of information together and they build up a picture. It's very, very rare you can say 100%, especially in the fog of war, and nobody's going to believe something that's coming from one side or the other unless you can get some form of independent investigation and verification. But that's highly unlikely. You can't get people into Gaza. The evidence will have been tampered with. And if we look at the last time independent investigations went in to look at Bashar al-Assad's use of chemical weapons inside Syria. It took months to get people in. It took months to get the reports out, and people still questioned them. So it's bringing all of those different snippets of information together, building that picture, and then you get the likes of President Biden, who will get his own independent intelligence organizations looking at similar collection methods and similar information, but whispering to him what the final outcome is.
Thank you very much, Philip.
It adds even more credibility to it.
That's really helpful and informative. Well, I'm now joined live from Tel Aviv by Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, again, thank you for joining me. This is difficult for the Israeli government, isn't it? Because Hamas can put out a lie, which, in the old cliche, has gone around the world before the truth has put its boots on. How does Israel catch up in the information battle that is going on?
Well, Israel is always in difficulty here because there is so much of the world ranged against Israel, even when you look at the horrific events of the weekend before last. Even that didn't really deflect many of the media organisations, and I exclude GBNews from this, but many of the UK and other world media organisations that are institutionally biased against Israel, as well as organisations like the EU and the UN, and many of our universities. There's an inbuilt bias against Israel, and so Israel's constantly fighting an anti-Israel propaganda campaign. And another thing that really complicates Israel's position is that Hamas can say whatever they want. No one questions what they say a lot of the time, and they don't have to justify it. They're not accountable to anybody. Whereas the IDF can't just come out with things, and therefore when you have a situation like the tragedy last night, the IDF will not immediately say, no, it wasn't us. They will research it, they will check it. I think it took them 2 hours before they suggested it may not have been them, and then about 12 hours or something before they were able to say for sure. But they have to be certain of their facts before they can say anything. And in my experience, I've been out here for pretty much every one of the Gaza conflicts and other conflicts as well. In my experience, the IDF, and you said this yourself, Jacob, the IDF will never say we didn't do it if they know or think they did or aren't sure they didn't. They will, whenever there's been tragic incidents involving the deaths of civilians, either accidental or deliberate in some cases, the IDF will say they did it and explain why they did it. But nevertheless, irrespective of that, you know, the truth, as you say, has put its hat on or whatever, and there's no changing people's minds. There's absolutely no changing people's minds. Whatever the IDF do, they have to fight this battle, but I don't believe they're ever going to win this particular battle. And
it's nonetheless very important because actually listening to news outlets this morning, the two sides were reported as if they were of equal trustworthiness, whereas actually there's such a strong vested interest in Hamas always blaming the Israelis. And as you say, the IDF is very careful to ensure it's got its facts right because it's democratically accountable. It's accountable to the people of Israel, but also it follows the rule of law.
Indeed it does, and it follows it scrupulously. And from my observations, I've been out here since last Monday, and from my observations, everything the IDF has done has been within the laws of armed conflict, and they take great efforts to do that, both in this conflict and previously. That doesn't mean civilians aren't going to get killed, because unfortunately civilians do get killed, and it's in Hamas's interest that civilians get killed. Hamas want their civilians to get killed, and one of the reasons, or the main reason for that, is because they want to vilify. They want to get Israel vilified, isolated, delegitimized in the eyes of the world. And so, if a few of their civilians die, or a lot of their civilians die, they really don't care about that. They're quite happy for that to happen, as long as it ends up in the finger of blame being pointed at Israel, and Israel ending up in the dock of world opinion. And one other thing I'd say on this whole business of disinformation, many media outlets I watched over the course of the time since this occurred, including UK media outlets, excluding GBNews, did quote, as if it was some kind of authority, the Gaza Health Ministry, with the figures they gave. The Gaza Health Ministry, 500, 800. The Gaza Health Ministry is not the NHS. It's an organisation controlled by Hamas, and they will say whatever Hamas want them to say. And if they give casualty figures, they will say the total figures that they want to give, which is, it could be civilians killed, they'll add to that military killed, they'll add to that someone who died of a heart attack or of old age or whatever. These figures, if they're ever quoted, they should be quoted with extreme caution.
But do you think the Israeli government is good enough at trying to win the hearts and minds argument that it has suffered such a terrible and wicked tragedy, and yet the reporting of it 10 days later is sympathetic to the terrorists? Is there more they can do to ensure that their propaganda, their own argument, is heard more clearly and more loudly? And the truth, more importantly?
Well, they're very conscious of that, Jacob. And I know that they work hard at it, not just during the times of conflict, but in between times, because they are... I've described this anti-Israel campaign as the greatest slur campaign in the history of the world, and that's exactly what it is. It has huge traction all around the world, and it's very difficult to dislodge people from it. And my view now, of course, it's important that Israel does what it can to maintain public opinion or to gain public opinion, but above all, what they've got to do now and focus on now is not that. They've got to focus on eliminating, crushing and destroying Hamas, maybe turning their attention to Hezbollah up in the north. That's got to be their overwhelming priority now. They should do what they can about the keeping people on side, but the priority for them is, as I just described, plus doing everything they can to keep world governments, such as the UK government, which I think has been very supportive, and the US also has been very supportive. That's the key, I think, for Israel.
Well, thank you very much, Colonel. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up next, in the wake of this strike on the Al-Ahli hospital, Western embassies have been targets of protests and civil unrest. I'll be speaking to Lynn May on claims that the UK could be complicit in Israeli war crimes committed in Gaza.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Lynn, do you know, I'm not the only one utterly fed up with the sympathetic attention given to noisy protesters, whoever they are. We object, but we don't waste police time showing off for the TV cameras. And Edward, surely the forensics, like the type of propellant, will be the equivalent of a fingerprint or DNA sample, and that will nail it. Edward, I think you are spot on. I think you've hit the nail on the head. In response to the strike at Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza yesterday evening, demonstrators stormed the Israeli consulate in Jordan, while Western embassies were targeted in Turkey, Tunisia and Lebanon, with rioting also breaking out in the West Bank. Turkish President Recep Erdogan accused Western allies of adding fuel to the fire and overlooking Israeli violations and aid blocking. He questioned the intentions of the US, in particular, for its provision of an aircraft carrier to Israel. This week, Downing Street rebuked claims from Conservative MP Crispin Blunt, who claimed that the UK could be complicit in more crimes being committed in Gaza. The allegations follow Israel's warning for the 1.2 million people living in the Gaza Strip to move to the south ahead of a ground invasion. Well, I'm now joined by the political commentator, Lynn May. Lynn, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's always a pleasure. Israel has the right to respond and a need to respond in self-defence, doesn't it? That's broadly common ground of commentators in the UK.
Yeah, of course, they have a right to defend itself, but at what point do we still see it as defending oneself? Say, for example, if I have had a fight with you and I've punched you, you have a right to defend you. Of course not, but just as an example, and I punch you to beat you up, so to speak, only with my hands, and you go away and you get a gun and you get a knife and you come back to me, you now become the aggressor. I'm not defending myself. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So
yes.
At which point Israel now has to see, when people talk about what is a proportional response, we have seen a lot of people die. We have seen collective punishment be administered where thousands of people are told to move from where they are, not have any water, not have any electricity and not have any food.
Well, we've seen the largest massacre of Jewish people purely for being Jewish since the Holocaust. They weren't punched. They were shot, and they were burnt to death, and babies were murdered, and a Holocaust survivor was kidnapped. That's at the most serious end of attack, isn't it? And therefore, the attack in return, the defence in return, is entitled to be strong.
No, well, I don't think it's an entitlement for them to take the measures that they're taking. As we can see in international law, collective punishment is breaking international law.
But there isn't collective punishment, is there? That's why Israel has told civilians to move and has agreed with the Americans to open a corridor for relief, including for water, to ensure there is water and food and medicine getting into Gaza to the south. But they've warned people to move so that they can go after the terrorists. Surely that's fair.
When they were trying to move, their route was bombed by Israel, firstly. Secondly, only now are we hearing discussions of them being able to have food and water, and those corridors are now being opened up. But there's not much point of those corridors for humanitarian aid if there is no momentarily, position for ceasefire. If they're still going to continue to bomb, then how can you get that aid to millions of people?
But the Israeli position is completely different. They have warned civilians to move away so that they can go after the terrorists. Surely it's fair to go after the terrorists.
But then there's this discussion of the terrorists hiding amongst the civilians. So if that's the case, what would prevent the terrorists from then just moving along with them? And as I said, it was unrealistic to expect, the elderly, children, people in hospital, sick, to move, only have 24 hours, which was partially extended.
They've extended it for 24 hours, and they've agreed to allow supplies to go in. But I'm glad you're willing to call Hamas terrorists.
Yeah, I have no issues with calling. I am totally unequivocally against anyone who targets civilians. But then what needs to happen is we need to call that out on both sides.
But Israel's deliberately not targeting civilians. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of giving a warning. It's the whole point of allowing relief supplies in, whereas Hamas uses civilians as human shields.
But if you can see that water initially, electricity and food was prevented from access for 2 million people, would you not say that's collective punishment? Because essentially you're punishing 2 million people with a majority are civilians and children.
But the history of collective punishment is when sabotage was committed to an occupying force, and for every one of their soldiers killed, they killed 10 civilians. That's what collective punishment is about.
Yeah.
It's not about saying that in preparation for an invasion, we are taking away the ability of the enemy to fight. That's just a normal preparation for invasion.
But if we are to see that 2 million civilians can be affected, that is the collective punishment element.
No,
would you not agree?
No, I wouldn't, because the terrorists are in Gaza. The terrorists need to be removed. The Israelis are doing everything they can to minimise civilian casualties and warning civilians to move.
I don't think they are doing everything that they can, though. If we look at, let's look at a different war crime here. Geneva Article 8 stipulates if you bomb places of worship, it is breaking international law, therefore is a war crime. Israel has admitted to bombing mosques. What would you say about that war crime?
When you are selecting targets, it depends what's going on in that target. That people use all sorts of buildings as cover, but you're basically saying Israel shouldn't do anything. What are they allowed to do, in your view? Do they just have to put up with 2,000 people being killed, 200 hostages being taken?
Of course not, but what we have to look at is the proportion of what them defending themselves is. And I think now we have seen a lot of casualties. If you even look at decades of Palestinian people dying, according to the UN, far more Palestinian civilians have actually died more than Israelis. Now, I don't want to see anyone die, but the reality is what they've done so far is proportionate. Would you not agree when looking at the civilian casualties?
Israel withdrew from Gaza to allow it to be run as an independent state, and Hamas has then run Gaza as a terrorist state to attack Israel.
Yeah,
it is not surprising that, therefore, it's been a very difficult place to live when it's run as a terrorist state.
Of course it's a difficult place to live, and this is why I don't understand when people say, well, why can't they vote out or stand up to Hamas? But when you are living on aid, when you are in an open-air prison, when you haven't had the opportunity to vote since 2006...
This is the policy of Hamas, to ensure that the people of Palestine, people living in Gaza, are kept impoverished because it makes it easier for Hamas to carry out its terrorist act.
But we keep on talking about, you know, targeting Hamas. I've not seen, obviously it's good to question media, but I've not seen any, you know, specific targeted, you know, points of where they're actually getting Hamas. I'm seeing loads of visuals of children being killed. So at what point do you think that enough is enough where children are dying, visibly dying at the hands of, you know, these sorts of actions by Israel? Where do we stop?
Israel has very sensibly warned people to move so it can go after the terrorists. That's the whole point of its policy. Israel actively does not want to kill children, whereas Hamas actively went in and butchered babies.
But I'm asking
that is the difference.
I'm asking you at what point do you actually say, at what point, because I don't think, if we look at
Israel has to win. That the evil of Hamas has to be defeated.
Winning in war means a complete extermination
of the fighters.
And you think that can happen?
Of the fighters, but you have to protect the civilian population.
How are they going to target the fighters?
We are unfortunately out of time, but we must continue this conversation. Thank you very much, Lynn. Coming up next, could broken Britain's woes be solved by the private sector? Yes, of course. Plus, a wonderful, heroic French nun has taken on the net zero mob single-handedly and won. If God is with us, who can be against us?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels
We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
Your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Sharon says, I just want to say what a great interview with Colonel Richard Kemp. It's such a rarity to actually hear someone speak favourably and truthfully about Israel. And Brian, I'm saddened and appalled at so many in favour of terrorism rather than the victims. Well, today, the Office for National Statistics announced that the UK inflation rate had held steady at 6.7% for the last month as the rising food and drink prices eased back. Analysts predicted inflation would fall to 6.6% for the month of September, but despite petrol and diesel prices rising, the silver lining is the reduction in prices for food and drink for the first time in 2 years, as much anticipated relief for many households. The Institute for Economic Affairs today commented on September's consumer price index, saying that despite the disappointing inflation data for September, the Bank of England should now be thinking about cutting interest rates, not raising them again. Well, I'm joined now by the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the author and academic Lisa Mackenzie. They're not any relation, their names are spelled slightly differently. Reasonably good economic news, slightly encouraging. Bank of England should cut rates?
Let's be honest about it. 6.7 is totally unacceptable. However, the prediction is that it would literally fall by about 1.3, 1.4 next month as the energy price cuts come into it. But these are shocking numbers, and food prices remain very, they're going down. But that's what most people judge inflation by. What does it cost you to feed your family? Now, when we give away literally billions of pounds in a lockdown to sit on our fat backsides doing nothing for 18 months, what do you expect with inflation? So Boris should say something about this, right? Because he was, when you read now what's the evidence that's being given, his missus was basically running our lockdown policy. Absolutely shocking.
I think that's absolute nonsense. Lisa, what?
Well, I'm from a part of the country that is really struggling. I'm from the East Midlands. I'm from Nottinghamshire. And even though this is dropping, People are still really, really struggling up there. And I think they're actually probably more hard up this year than they were even last year. I think last year they were holding on so desperately, and it's taken a year. And things like petrol prices are still going up. You know,
but they're going up for one of the very good reasons that Jacob's just had an interview. I mean, there is a war going on in the Middle East, and that's where the oil is.
But the thing is people are still struggling. They are still struggling, and I can tell you now from where I live, up in Nottinghamshire, people are quite frightened about putting the heating on again.
Yeah, but that is true, by the way. That is not only true of Nottingham, that is true of the South. It's true of everywhere. Everybody is making an effort to actually cut down the amount of energy they use, and honestly, it is cold in some houses, including mine.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Including mine, actually.
Yes, and everybody is making an effort, and that's why they're not...
people are. I mean, of course they're making an effort. Nobody wants to not pay their bills. Actually, that's, you know, this idea that people don't pay is not true. They're really... They do everything to not so they can
But I think you made the fundamental point that actually inflation has lag effects. So when it first hits, people spend a little out of their savings, or they cut back a bit. But in the second year, you've got the cumulative effects, and that's very hard for people.
And what do you cut back on? Because perhaps you've cut back on... I mean, I know last year people were cutting back on sort of takeaways or meals out or cinema tickets or whatever, but this year there's nothing.
Can I say about that? Can I just say about that? I'd like to believe that was true. In my main high street, the thing that you see above all else is Deliveroo.
But you live in one of the richest areas of the country, so that's what's like that.
Anyway, you're not attacking me for that.
I'm not. No, you're not. You're not. But I want to move on, because there's another very interesting story. As the public's trust in the police force's ability to investigate and handle low-level crimes continues to wane, people are taking matters into their own hands. Dubbed Britain's first private police force, the company TMI was called in after £500 worth of sirloin steak and 20 bottles of Prosecco were taken from Marks & Spencer. As a result of this, for the first time, a suspected burglar is to be taken to court after the group, comprised of former Scotland Yard detectives, identified the alleged suspect from CCTV footage after he mounted an overnight raid on the food store. TMI employs 100 bobbies who wear police-style uniforms and 28 plainclothes detectives who mingle with shoppers. The firm even has its own legal department, which has already successfully prosecuted 280 shoplifters. Well, Kelvin, I know you've got views on this, but this is good news, isn't it? The shops standing up for themselves.
It's absolutely great news, and I'm sure there are people not far from me on this sofa who would say, this is the poor who are having to eat.
No, I'm not going to say that at all.
They are criminals, and they should... And what has happened is you go to any supermarket, and talk to the employees, they are scared.
Why don't we let Lisa speak for herself?
What I'm going to say is that what this shows is that actually the social contract is totally broken down, that we've got to have a private police force for people who can afford one. I mean, you know,
hold on, Tesco's, I mean, aren't just anybody, are they?
No, but what I'm saying is if we're going down the route where you can opt out of the education system, you can pay private, you can opt out of the healthcare system...
Thank
you can
God for that, by the way.
But don't you think it's quite sinister that you might be able to opt out of the justice system and employ a private police force to protect you or to fight for your justice? Because that means there's a lot of people who's not going to get that justice.
It's a different argument, isn't it? That the police have to devote their resources according to an overall interest, and they may have to police protests, and they may have other calls upon their time, whereas you can focus your resources on protecting your own assets. And the person who's stealing £500 worth of steaks and Prosecco is not stealing to feed his family.
But what about the people who live in... And listen, I live in a working class community. We are blighted with crime as well. We have got lots... You know, people are burgling. There is antisocial behaviour.
There is no difference between being poor and being burgled and being wealthy.
No, the police don't come.
But supermarkets doing it. But supermarkets doing it's helpful for all sections of society because it keeps prices down the supermarkets.
But what you could do now is if we've got a private police force, you can pay them. And I think that's a fundamental lack of justice.
Only the magnificently wealthy could even contemplate doing that. The ordinary middle class, working class people, nobody is actually going to start funding their own security. But Tesco's, Sainsbury's, it's in their commercial interest to make sure that people know that if they steal stuff, they're going to face the court.
But what when, you know, you might want to do that. You might think, oh, well, perhaps somebody, I don't know, stolen your bike.
But supermarkets doing it's massively interest of consumers, because when £500 of steak is stolen, you have to pay for that the next time you go to a supermarket and buy things.
But do you think
so this saves everybody money.
But do you think it's a good thing to have a private police force?
I worry about the police not doing what they're supposed to. I don't understand why policing isn't happening.
Crime has changed. I think if we had the senior officer here, he would say crime has changed out of all recognition. The online world has opened up a new criminal avenue of which everybody in the country appears to be going down it through fraud or various other tricks. They haven't got enough officers. Perhaps they've never had them. Right now, with an exploding population in our country and with increasing crime through tech, I'm afraid we would probably have to treble the size of our police forces.
It worries me. It worries me.
Well, thank you to my panel. Coming up next, we'll be discussing the heroic French nun on the front line fighting against the net zero hooligans. So a new report also wants to get rid of all gas by 2050. All gas and gators.
Are we doing it?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GBNews.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Now, this is a wonderful one from Daniel, which I hope we're putting up on the screen. Hi there, my daughter loves watching GB News with us and has been desperate to email you this picture. Well, that is such a flattering picture. If only I was as good looking as that. So thank you very much to your daughter, Daniel. And Karen says, I agree with both Mackenzies. No one is going to pay for this, but it is proof that our society is broken. Now, yesterday in France, and you know I like talking about the Catholic Church, a Catholic nun rugby tackled an environmental protester to the ground in the midst of a long-running feud between locals and Green campaigners. The protest occurred as the activists were trying to block the construction of a chapel and residential centre by the Famille Missionnaire de Notre-Dame, the missionary family of Our Lady, in the southern Ardèche department. Presuming, like me, you can't quite believe what you've just heard, we do in fact have the video evidence. Well, the nuns formed a human chain round a digger to stop protesters locking themselves onto it, as they had done during the previous incident last week. There is a certain similarity to those who challenged Just Stop Oil in London earlier this year. The public is fed up with these pseudo-do-gooders and have been provoked beyond endurance. And this comes as today the Prime Minister has been warned by the chairman of the National Infrastructure Commission that Britain must abolish Britain's gas grid by 2050 if we want to reach net zero. But that's not all. Apparently we must have a ban on all gas boilers by 2035 and issue billions in grants for heat pumps. Well, Lisa, you're an anarchist.
I am.
Catholic nuns are usually very well ordered, but wasn't it amazing to see her wearing her wimple and proper nun's dress? Just go for it.
Do you know what? She could probably be in the women's rugby team, I think, with that. But I think that's a good... It's a really interesting, I suppose, scenario where activists come in to communities, they're not from there, and they actually really start annoying the people who live there, and they don't get on side with the community. And I think if the Catholic nuns are sort of rising up, we must be in sort of heavy revolution.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think you mess with Catholic nuns, do you, too easily?
In fact, I don't know any Catholic nuns, so I was amazed to see that that's what they can get up to. But what is interesting is that she probably represents a much wider area than when you look at a nun, you think, oh lovely, oh dear, or what a waste of a life, or whatever you think, right? But then you see that and you think, oh, actually, decent people.
Do you think that? What a waste of a life?
I do. Actually.
I did go.
I feel like that about monks as well.
I went recently to the Tyburn convent, and the nuns there are just wonderful, and they are such strong-minded, devoted ladies. I'm a huge admirer of nuns. I'm on the other side from you on this, Kelvin. But isn't there something about the environmental protests? And this ties in with the National Infrastructure Committee saying we should spend billions on heat pumps. They're talking about £6 billion a year, and then forcing the cut-off of gas by 2050. I mean, for people you were talking about earlier, in the East Midlands, who are finding life tough and expensive, this is just ridiculous.
It's like a pie-in-the-sky idea. That's what it would be to people. I mean, we've got millions of people who have no control over the housing that they live in because they are either renting from private landlords, or they're renting from the council, or they've got no home at all. And we've got millions of people in the country that have...
We do not have millions of people who've got no home at all.
No, we have millions of people who have no safe, secure, affordable housing,
but we've also...
and they have no control. You can't, you can't say to them, you need a heat pump.
Well, we've got 11 million houses that, out of 29 million, that are unsuitable for heat pumps.
Yes, look, it's a massive issue, a financial issue, and every single government going forward will be pushing it very firmly down the road. The idea of turning around to ordinary people and saying it's 15,000.
OK, that's what you say, and I think that would be sensible. What we're doing in Parliament today, we were voting through this ridiculous energy bill, which makes all this stuff law, makes it easier to enforce, almost compulsory to enforce.
One of our major issues is this, that we are taking gas from people who are not our friends. So take Qatar today. Qatar sends nearly £500 million a year to Hamas. They fund those terrorists.
You'll have no argument from me about
and so
Qatar.
we have to come to a point where we are energy sufficient.
So that's fracking.
So that is fracking.
The only way to do that is fracking.
And also the North Sea.
So I come from a mining community, a mining family. My dad, granddad, great-granddad, great-great-granddad were miners. We know about energy, and it's a shame that people who live in those communities now are frightened to put the heating on because they are cold, and the energy that we've got is not affordable for them. But also, when these ideas come out about £15,000 heat pump, how can people even start to imagine that's going to... What are they going to do?
It is simply not going to happen. It's also not going to happen because,
it may happen.
For instance, if you want to get, you've got a car, electric car. You live in a certain kind of flat or a housing association. By the way, there is no way that you're going to be able to get...
even the electric car frightens people.
Until we get Shell and BP, who are prepared to turn their garages, right, cut their own throats, into electric charging points, we haven't got enough.
Who's got 25 grand for an electric car there?
The cost of an electric car and then the time it takes to charge up. If you're trying to do a journey and complete it and get home, it's completely impractical.
So, look, you're the politician.
Yeah.
What on earth? We've got socialism coming up. Imagine what that's going to be like.
This is the bit that completely puzzles me. Why are the politicians backing what people want to make their lives easier? And cheap energy is at the heart of economic growth.
Even your own party hasn't got a set view about this.
Well, Rishi said the right thing 10 days ago, or 20.
He did.
Yeah, and that was an improvement.
I mean, what about the sort of building housing that are more sustainable?
That's a thought. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Sorry to cut Liz off short. Now, one final thing that may amuse you. Some of you may have noticed that an ancient bylaw has taken effect in the case of the repair of the Millennium Bridge over the Thames. A bale of hay has been hung from the bridge in what seems to be a quirky tradition, but in fact, like many of our traditions, serves an important purpose. The bale of hay signals to oncoming ships that the headroom has been significantly reduced owing to the repair works. But in Britain we have all sorts of weird and wonderful laws which ought to never be repealed. For example, the fact that it's illegal to be drunk in a pub according to the Licensing Act of 1872. It's illegal to gamble in a library according to the Library Offences Act of 1898. And my favourite, according to the Salmon Act 1986, quite recent, it's illegal to handle salmon suspiciously. So you be careful. Don't handle your salmon smoked or unsmoked, wild or farmed, suspiciously. And that's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what have you got in store this evening? Some dangerous salmon?
No, it should be illegal to serve the kind of content I'm about to do 9 till 11, that's for sure, Jacob. But look, we are going to be looking at what's going on around Europe as well. I'm asking whether or not our Liberal politicians have actually made us less safe on the streets. This is in light of a series of Islamist incidents that are taking place. Nigel Farage joins me. He's going to be talking about whether or not Joe Biden is leading us towards World War III. Did you see him today? It's a hard watch for Sleepy Joe, isn't it? I'm going to be having the clash as well. Lee Anderson joins me, and a transgender fencer is under the microscope as well. It's all to play for tonight, Jacob. 9 till 11.
Oh, that sounds extremely feisty and exciting stuff, and the great Lee Anderson is always worth listening to, as long as our Nigel. That's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and there may be stories of a storm going round, but I'm sure Somerset will do very well regardless.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Storm Babette arrives over the next 24 hours, bringing with it exceptional rainfall for eastern Scotland in particular. Red warning has been issued. Here's Babette for the rest of Wednesday, moving into central parts of the UK. It's been a wet day for southern areas, but that rain's now moving into North Wales, the Midlands, Northern England and Northern Ireland overnight, especially heavy across Northern Ireland with the risk of 30 to 50 or even 60